We're rounding in on 8 years of Splatoon now. The first game was released for the Wii U on May 28th, 2015. Splatoon seemed at the time like the biggest anomaly in Nintendo's recent history, a company who plays things very conservatively, stoking the same few franchises like Mario, Zelda, or Animal Crossing, rather than trying anything new. Nintendo have traditionally been very reluctant to accept the internet as the future of gaming, deliberately choosing to stay a good 10 years behind the technology. Stepping up to the plate with an online multiplayer competitive shooter, an already crowded genre, and trying to create a game that could appeal to their family-friendly audience seemed like a recipe for disaster. What's more, the Wii U already had the makings of a massive failure, which, it's safe to say, is how the system ultimately ended up being remembered. Elden Ring sold more copies in a year than the Wii U did in its entire lifespan. Think about that for a minute. It seems like Splatoon could very easily have been another footnote in Nintendo's history, another forgotten exclusive curiosity like Odama or ARMS or Sin and Punishment. Instead, Splatoon somehow became Nintendo's breakout hit for the Wii U. It ended up as the 6th highest selling Wii U game overall, above games like Super Mario Maker, Wind Waker HD, Twilight Princess HD, Mario Party 10. It was an incredibly strong launch for a new IP, and has gone on to quickly become one of the defining franchises of the company in the modern era. In the 8 years since Splatoon 1 released, we've gotten 2 sequels, Splatoon 2 and Splatoon 3, which is highly unusual for the company, who are famous for long development times between mainline entries of their series. In contrast, it took Pikmin 12 years to make it to the third entry, and it took Luigi's Mansion 18 years. I'm a huge fan of the Splatoon games. I basically got my Wii U back in the day to play that and Mario Maker. And as far as I'm concerned, those games alone justified the system. Splatoon 2 was the game that sold me a Nintendo Switch, and I bought Splatoon 3 the day it was released. I've put a lot of time into the Splatoon series. I love their presentation, I love their music, I love their characters. I have an almost complete set of the amiibo, although I'm still missing the Octo Girl and Octopus Form ones because they're astonishingly expensive and they keep refusing to reprint them. I play Splatoon 3 at the very least until I get my daily win every day. I try to get the super bonuses every time Salmon Run resets. These are, at present, my favorite multiplayer shooters on the market. The Splatoon games are very unique. Their emphasis not on kills, but on territory control by painting the map in your team's color, makes them feel wholly different from any other shooter out there. The fact that the matches are just 3 minutes a pop makes it really easy to sit down and play a match or two while I've got dinner in the oven every night. The way the menus are presented as a social hub area to run around is great. The way the game's fashion is designed for player expression and lets you build your character's stats in a meaningful way give the games a wonderful sense of progression. The drawings that pop up both above other players' heads and in maps themselves as graffiti have kept the spirit of the Miiverse alive. The huge variety of weapons not only split between archetypes, but with different ranges, fire rates, and special moves between each gun, give you tons of reasons to keep coming back. Splatoon is fantastic. Splatoon 2 is fantastic, and for my money, Splatoon 3 is the best the franchise has ever been. It's no wonder that these games have inspired such a passionate fan base, who care so profoundly not only about the games and the meta, but the differences between installments themselves. Splatoon 1, 8 years out, almost 6 years out from the release of the sequel, still has an active player base. It outlived Overwatch. I had no problem grabbing multiplayer match footage for the game on Wii U, the very first time I tried on a random Monday afternoon. And let's be honest, that means its matchmaking track record is better than Splatoon 3's is. But there is another side to this franchise. Splatoon is sold as a competitive multiplayer game, and that is undoubtedly where the focus lies, but each of these games has a full single-player campaign, referred to as Hero Mode, included with it. Splatoon 2 sold an extra campaign, the Octo expansion, separately, and now Splatoon 3 has announced Side Order, which is a similar single-player focused experience. I think there's value in examining the aspects of a franchise that get less attention, existing out of the spotlight. We have 4 shooter campaigns from the Splatoon series now. That's enough for the franchise to have grown and expanded its scope quite significantly. These are high-quality products which are justifiably overshadowed by their corresponding games' multiplayer offerings. But they are still Nintendo-made 3D platformer games, and are just as polished and clever in points as you'd expect from that. As these games have gone on, their single-player modes have only gotten more ambitious. So I'm going to explore the single-player side of the Splatoon franchise, and how the games have changed and grown. So let's take a look at these campaigns. Octo Valley, Octo Canyon, Octo Expansion, and Return of the Mammalians. I want to talk about the differences between these campaigns and some missteps they've taken along the way. Then, finally, I want to talk about the deep philosophical and spiritual meaning of the Splatoon games. The way these games are saying something really profound about— No, I'm just messing with you. It's just Sploon. I want to talk about these games because I like them a lot, and no one stopped me yet. The first Splatoon's campaign is titled Octo Valley. The Octo Valley campaign would be responsible for laying the groundwork for a lot of the Splatoon universe's setting and world building, so I think it only makes sense to begin by talking about that world being built. If there's one thing Splatoon is famous for narratively, it's that despite the extremely kid-friendly presentation and overall content of the game, there is a darker side to the universe that you uncover throughout the campaigns. Now, I don't want to frame this as one of those "this family-friendly game is hiding a dark secret" videos. I don't want to be hyperbolic. Splatoon is still a family-friendly, upbeat game, but I also won't be coy here. Splatoon is a post-apocalyptic world. Or rather, it's a post-post-apocalyptic world. This is not a secret, this is not subtext, this is text. I'm going to talk about Splatoon lore in these videos, because it is part of this franchise, and I do like it, but for the record, Splatoon lore is silly, really silly. That's a feature, not a bug. If I say something in Splatoon is silly, I'm saying it as a positive, because I find all of this deep lore existing super charming. It's a kid's game. They didn't have to do this, but they did, and it makes me smile. At some point in the near future, rising water levels drove all land-based life to extinction, and mammals all became a distant memory. Not sure why dolphins and whales didn't make it, but here we are. In the distant future, around 12,000 years later, sea life has evolved to the point where it has what we recognize as human-level intelligence. Eventually, the waters receded, and many of these sea creatures evolved to walk on land. There's more going on with all of this, specifics of both the downfall of humanity, their attempts to save themselves, and how and why sea life evolved to so closely resemble our modern society are all dealt with explicitly within the narrative of the game so far. We'll get there. So that's the lore. If you haven't played the campaigns, then I can't stress this enough. This is not a fan theory. This is not what if Ash Ketchum was secretly in a coma or anything like that. Everything I just said is explicitly part of the story. This is the setting for the world, but it's only kind of what Splatoon is about, at least initially. The closest thing I can compare this to is Adventure Time. Adventure Time is another kid-friendly, family-friendly property with darker elements lurking beneath the surface, which it doesn't focus on initially, but which come more and more to prominence as time goes on. I think Adventure Time's narrative and where it goes with those past elements is a lot stronger, but it's a similar idea. The actual antagonists of the first two campaigns in Splatoon aren't really related to any of this lore, though. They're the Octarians, a species which descended from modern octopi. At some point, 100 or so years before the events of Splatoon, the Octarians waged war on the other species, attempting to take all the land for themselves. This is known as the Great Turf War. This is like a real war, though, not the fun sport which is called Turf War in the game's present day. The Octarians were eventually defeated and forced to live underground. Now the other species live in harmony above ground, living for things like fashion, music, and sport, while the other Octarians have been forced to scrape by with the few resources they can scavenge from the remaining underground shelters built by humans thousands of years ago. The first two campaigns, Splatoon 1's Octo Valley and Splatoon 2's Octo Canyon, will be primarily concerned with this conflict between the Inklings, descended from squids, and the Octarians, and while things get a little more complicated in the second game, all of that deep lore really only serves as background set dressing. You can play through the first two campaigns knowing nothing other than squid's good, octopus's evil, and you won't really have to think about it any harder than that. Splatoon 2's Octo Expansion and Splatoon 3's Return of the Mammalians, though, shift the narrative focus dramatically. Although your enemies are still Octarians, they are, in both cases, not actually the force behind the events of the game, and are being controlled by an external force. The main theme of both of these campaigns is the remnants of human civilization, directly concerning itself with the question of what exactly happened to the humans, and the impact of their technology left behind after their extinction, and what their final days and failed attempts at survival looked like. I'm getting ahead of myself, though. The Octo Valley campaign begins with the player entering a sewer grate, which you can see one of the principal characters of the series, Captain Cuttlefish, peeking out of. Captain Cuttlefish is an old soldier from the Great Turf War, who now secretly leads the new Squidbeak Splatoon. This is a sort of secret agent type thing where his agents and granddaughters Agent 1 and Agent 2 go on undercover missions to stop Octarian threats before they can come to fruition. Agent 1 and Agent 2 are better recognized by their real identities, the Squid Sisters, Callie and Marie, pop idols who are beloved by the people of Inkopolis. At the beginning of the game, the Great Zapfish has been kidnapped. The Great Zapfish and the lesser regular Zapfish are electric catfish used as the primary energy source for Inkopolis. If they aren't recovered, then it'll be lights out for everyone. Captain Cuttlefish is correctly convinced that the Octarians have kidnapped the Zapfish, and so he recruits a brand new agent, Agent 3, the player character, to help stop them. It turns out that the Octarians are using the Zapfish to power the old Great Octo weapons, which are functionally mechs used by the Octarians in the Great Turf War. These will be the game's boss fights. That's basically the entire story of Octo Valley. You and Cuttlefish, and later on Agents 1 and 2, are trying to rescue the Zapfish, then you do, ultimately rescuing the Great Zapfish from DJ Octavio at the end of the game. The Zapfish are based on a real animal, by the way, the electric catfish, which is a pretty neat detail. Obviously, in real life, you couldn't use an electric catfish to power a city, but they are a real animal capable of generating an electric field or shock with a special organ. It feels like Nintendo did their research and really had an enthusiasm for weird underwater life, and had fun building different characters using that knowledge. It's one of the Splatoon franchise's greatest strengths. Another example of this is how brilliant the Octarians' designs are. They're meant to be octopodes, of course, but the only one we ever see who actually looks like an octopus is DJ Octavio, their leader. Most of them are just a single animated tentacle with a face stuck on it, one of the funniest designs I've ever seen. It's also really clever, though, if you look at the biology of an actual real-life octopus. See, an octopus doesn't just have one brain, it has 9. one central brain in the main body of the octopus, but also a smaller sub-brain inside each of its 8 arms. And the animal as a whole can either operate with these brains in tandem, or each arm can move, taste, and think independently of each other. If an octopus loses an arm, not only can it regrow it, but that severed arm will keep moving and can stay alive for up to an hour. I view the Octarian's designs being animate single tentacles as a cheeky reference to this idea that the octopus arms are sort of independent beings in real life. Another way they've built their zany world off of the back of the real-life strange science of ocean life. If there's one word which I would use to describe Octo Valley, then it is simple. The story is simple, the levels are simple, and the whole thing is over in around 4 or 5 hours. Less if you aren't being completionist. I say simple, but that doesn't mean bad. Splatoon has pretty unique mechanics. Inking, painting territory and keeping control of it away from the enemy, was a new idea, and there still isn't much like it now. These missions are mostly very simple, but that's okay in the way it's okay that Super Mario 64's levels are simpler than those of, say, Galaxy or Odyssey, because both the developers and the players were learning entirely new systems of 3D control. Both the developers and the player are learning what the fundamentals of movement, momentum, and territory control swimming through ink are, and they will push these ideas much further in later games. One of the things that makes Splatoon stand out so strongly is its use of gyroscope aiming as the default control scheme. Motion controls are one of the most tragically misunderstood and maligned aspects of Nintendo's recent history, but Splatoon really does show how great they can be, and they're especially suited to Splatoon as a game, which often requires broad, sweeping movement in its aiming to ink terrain, but also requires more precise aiming when taking out enemies. You can turn the gyro controls off in Splatoon, but I find the stick aiming makes the game far harder, as once you've grown used to it, the gyro aim is far more intuitive and easier to control than dual stick aim is. It's a shame more console games haven't embraced gyro aim, as it's extremely rare if you're playing outside of a Nintendo platform or on a PC. Sadly, Splatoon also sort of shows how much of a misstep the Wii U gamepad was, since the main feature of the system, the second screen, is really only ever used to refer to the map. I'd say I wish the Wii U gamepad were more integrated into the gameplay, but honestly, I don't. Games like Star Fox Zero show how badly that can go. Really, I think the use of the Wii U gamepad in Splatoon being so superfluous shows what a misstep the gimmick was, as playing a dual-screen game is never as interesting or fun when the screens are separated between a TV and your hands, as it is when they're next to each other on a DS or 3DS. Octo Valley is split into 5 different mini-hubs called sectors. These hubs really only exist for you to platform from mission to mission, located inside kettles, which are invisible until splattered with ink. There are a total of 27 levels in Splatoon 1, plus 5 boss fights, one at the end of each sector. You have to complete every kettle in a sector before the boss kettle will open, and you can progress to the next one, although you can tackle the missions within a given sector in any order you choose. Through this, you'll be given the Hero Shot, a version of the game's standard splattershot weapon. In each level, you can collect salmon eggs, which can be spent at an upgrade terminal to enhance things like your ink tank capacity, unlock different types of bombs, and so on. I hadn't revisited the campaign of Splatoon 1 since Splatoon 2 released, and so I was a little bit surprised to find that the idea of collecting salmon eggs was there right from the start. Salmon eggs and salmonids, the creatures they come from, become a pivotal element of the franchise in Splatoon 2 and 3, both in the game's Salmon Run mode and in the third game's campaign, so it's neat to see that they were here right from the start. In addition to collecting eggs, the game's equivalent of a coin-type collectible, there's also a hidden sunken scroll in each level. These scrolls will give a little lore page to look at when collected. This is where most of the background lore, which I talked about at the beginning, comes from, at least in the first game. They also have some fun reveals in them, like explaining how Judd, the cat who calls the victor at the end of each match of the multiplayer, still exists after the apocalypse. He was frozen in cryogenic stasis by a human scientist, and then thawed out thousands of years later in the game's present day. In each level, you have a limited number of lives, starting at 3 in a mission, but refilling up to a max of 3 each time you reach a checkpoint, if you've lost any along the way. Lose all your lives, and you have to restart the mission all over again. I imagine that lives were included as a way to add some amount of difficulty to the game, since this original campaign is undeniably very, very easy. This was misguided though, as I don't really think it achieved that goal. The campaign is so easy, I only ran out of lives a single time during my playthrough for this video. Lives are, in general, a pretty outdated mechanic, which made more sense in the age of milking players for quarters at arcades, or trying to artificially extend the length of a game on the Super Nintendo, to keep players from beating it in a single sitting, and they just don't make much sense here. They really won't make much sense through the entire series, as each game after this would let you continue from your most recent checkpoint, even if you do run out of lives, making them pretty meaningless. One frustrating aspect of all of the Splatoon campaigns is that you cannot reset your progress to start them over without erasing your multiplayer save data and progress as well. Although this isn't the biggest deal in the world because you can replay the levels as many times as you'd like, the interstitial cutscenes and dialogue will never replay, collectibles will remain collected, and gear will remain upgraded. That sucks a lot of the fun out of trying to replay the games, in my opinion. Save data is tied to your profile on the Wii U and Switch respectively, so the way to get around this, if, say, you're making a YouTube video about all of the campaigns and need footage of them, is to make a new profile on the system and replay the game on that new profile. This means it's not a huge deal that you can't reset progress, but it's still a frustrating oversight I'd like to see fixed in future installments, since it's an extra step that's more than a little frustrating. One curious thing about Splatoon as a franchise is that the multiplayer levels are all built to have a cohesive sense of place, while the single-player levels exist in these strange, abstract zones. A single-player level of Splatoon will typically be made up of a series of floating platforms, with surreal floating objects and imagery in the distance. Narratively, this is not actually as abstracted as you might expect. These levels are supposed to be the spaces which the Octarians escaped to underground, and you can look in the distance and tell that these zones are, in fact, large caverns, with screens faking a horizon in the distance. While there are jokes in the game about the Octarians having creepy floating platforms for architecture, these spaces aren't meant to have been built entirely by the Octarians. Rather, they found existing underground spaces, bunkers built by the ancient humans, and colonized them. There's no reason for the strange floating objects, though, as far as I know. I really have no idea why giant objects show up repeatedly in Splatoon as a franchise. The only single-player missions that tend to break this trend are the ones built in repurposed multiplayer maps. These typically involve fighting octolings, a subspecies of Octarian which closely resemble Inklings, and thus humans. These repurposed multiplayer map levels often try to imitate the feeling of a multiplayer match, especially in Splatoon 2's campaign and the Octo expansion. Just because these single-player spaces are abstract doesn't mean they don't have personality, though. The objects you see in the distance still give these levels distinction, like some of the levels which feature a sort of theme park aesthetic, with the large Ferris wheel floating out in space. There are also little details like the Zapfish being replaced by a plush stand-in if you replay a level which you've already cleared before. Personality is consistently one of Splatoon's greatest strengths, and little details like this give the campaign a lot of charm. I called Splatoon a shooter, but as far as the single-player modes go, I'm not sure if that's a very good description. It is a game where you shoot things, sure, but the way the game is structured, the way the game is built, it's more of a 3D platformer. Not to mention, the unique ink mechanic, letting you paint territory and then swim in it, is still pretty unique as far as games go, even years after the franchise's debut. If I had to compare Splatoon to something, the closest thing I can think of is actually the Ratchet and Clank series, which is also a semi-weird, rare hybrid of platforming and shooting, in a way that we don't see all that often. Splatoon still doesn't really fit that either, though, since it's more tightly level-based, and often in the later campaigns includes unique puzzles or experimental mechanics. It is this lack of easy definition more than anything else which made me want to talk about the series on this channel. These campaigns don't get talked about nearly as much as Nintendo's other 3D platformers like Mario or Kirby, but as far as single-player games go, they're still pretty unique. There's not much else like Splatoon, and if you want to have this specific 3D platformer, shooter, and puzzler gameplay, you kind of have to go to Splatoon. The levels may be simple, but that doesn't mean they're devoid of mechanics or cool ideas. Pretty much every level in the first game boils down to progress through this level, defeat Octarians, and rescue the Zapfish at the end. But there are some mechanics introduced as it goes on, such as the sponges introduced in the second world, which are able to grow when shot with ink that open up new possibilities for platforming. There are a pretty limited number of enemy types in this first game as well. Mostly you're fighting your basic Octarians and occasionally Octoballs or little Octo Missiles, and of course the Octolings who emulate player characters. The game shines the most in its boss fights, though. Each of these offer fun twists on the simple inking mechanics, as well as often having some light Shadow of the Colossus appeal, as you have to ink and swim up the body of the boss itself. The game's first boss, the Octo Stomp, is actually the only boss who shows up in all 4 of the series' campaigns, making it the most common boss in the entire series. Although the way it shows up in Splatoon 3 is kind of a cheat. You'll see when we get there. The Octo Stomp is a great example of how these sort of boss fights tend to play out, as they almost always involve waiting for the boss to do some sort of attack which stuns it or makes it briefly vulnerable, then inking a path on its body which you can swim up in order to hit its weak point. This is exactly how Octo Stomp plays out, as it will throw itself at you, trying to crush you, and then stay vulnerable for a moment as you swim up its side. You have to do this 3 times, and each time, the amount of inkable terrain on its side gets smaller. The other bosses play out in a similar way. Octo Nozzle has weak points which must be shot in order to stun it, then climb up the side. Octo Whirl has to be lured over your controlled terrain in order to stick it in the ink and slow it down, and Octo Maw must have its teeth shot out, and then you have to throw a bomb into its mouth to stun it. The final level, the final boss fight against DJ Octavio, is the most different, since it is essentially an entire platforming level which you must progress through while fighting Octavio all at the same time. Octavio fights you from his large floating DJ booth, blasting you with both music as well as Octo Missiles. The attack you need to watch for, though, is him shooting his mechanical fists at you. These can be inked to rocket them back at Octavio, damaging him and pushing him back further into the level. This is a spin on a classic Nintendo boss fight. It's shown up in games like Ocarina of Time, Wind Waker, and Super Mario Galaxy. This final boss fight / mission is, fittingly, the hardest part of the campaign. It can actually be pretty tricky, and might take you a few attempts the first time you reach it. Though this first campaign is simple with relatively few mechanics at play, this final level really does take advantage of all of them, and demands much more of the player than anything else in the campaign. Eventually, you'll get to a point where Agent 1 and Agent 2 will overpower Octavio's music with their own performance, a song called the Calamari Incantation, which lets the player finally defeat the evil DJ. This concert by the Squid Sisters ends up being a major event in the Splatoon lore timeline, so, put a pin in it. I'm not kidding, we'll circle back to this a few times. For now, just understand that while it's true that the first campaign can be thought of as simply good guys, bad guys, the Octarians are not completely unsympathetic. While they were the aggressors in the Great Turf War, the sunken scrolls you read give you an idea that the conditions the Octarians are living in now aren't great, scraping by for what limited resources they have with very little energy, hiding in ancient underground caves while they see everyone else up above having a great time. They're running out of power, and the caverns are falling apart. They can't keep going like this forever. That's why they've stolen the Zapfish, and that's going to come to a head as the series progresses. When you beat the game, you're treated to a newsflash special by the Squid Sisters, telling Inkopolis that the Great Zapfish has been rescued, and it will return to its place on Inkopolis Tower in the main hub. Then you get treated to a really fun interactive credits sequence where you get to spray ink on the credits as they roll. I love a good interactive credits sequence, and this passes my cool bar. Completing these single-player campaigns is not just its own reward. You also get unlocks in the multiplayer mode of each game for completing its associated campaign. In this first game, you get both the hero set you've been wearing throughout the entire game and the armor set worn by the Octolings upon completing the campaign. Collecting the Sunken Scrolls also unlocks more weapons for sale in the Ammo Knights store. Ammo Knights is another great sea life pun. Ammo Knights, Ammonites, I love it. The overall simplicity, as well as the short length of the campaign, is why this story mode was talked about pretty exclusively as a bonus back in 2015 when Splatoon launched. They barely promoted the single player at all before launch, and I think most players and outlets were surprised at the game including one at all. It's fun and worth playing through, but it only takes 4 or 5 hours to 100%, and there's very little replay value once you're done. Here's the weird part, though. There actually is a good deal of single-player content in this first game I haven't talked about yet. Content which it's very likely even people who have played all of the Splatoon campaigns don't know about. See, this was a weird time for Nintendo when they were still figuring out downloadable content, and ways to sell content packs piecemeal. There are challenge mode versions of the campaign levels available, special versions of the levels with different weapons and restrictions officially sold by Nintendo. Why is this content so obscure? Well, it wasn't sold as DLC. Instead, it was a functionality of the game's amiibo. There are 5 amiibo associated with the first Splatoon. We aren't concerned with the Callie and Marie amiibo for this conversation. The only thing they let you do is watch a concert performed by the 2 characters, transforming the main game's hub area into the version typically reserved for Splatfest events. Cool, but not all that meaningful. A really good use of amiibo content, honestly. The other 3 amiibo, though, not only include unique armors, which are unlocked by scanning them, but unique challenge mode versions of the levels. 20 challenge modes per amiibo for a whopping 60 challenge mode levels. As a reminder, there are only 32 levels in the game if you're counting both the levels and boss fights together. That means one could argue that more single-player content is locked behind amiibo than is offered in the main game. These challenge modes differ between the amiibo used. Inkling Girl offers Charger challenges, which have you replay levels with the game's version of a sniper rifle weapon. Inkling Boy has Roller challenges, which use the large paintbrush instead of the hero shot. Where this gets really interesting, though, are the Inkling Squid challenges, which are split between limited ink challenges, which give you only a set amount of ink to complete a level with, unable to refill by swimming, and Kraken challenges, which give you access to one of the game's most powerful super moves, the Kraken, and let you use it without limitation. This is incredibly powerful, but these are also offset by being time trial levels, making you rush your way through as fast as possible. It is an exaggeration to characterize these amiibo levels as being more content than the base game has, because they are still the same levels the base game offered. However, these levels are meaningful content, especially the limited ink and Kraken challenges. Even the Charger and Roller levels change how you need to approach these missions pretty dramatically. This is good content, It's well designed, it's interesting to replay these missions in a different way. I get what the developers were trying to do with these. Ideally, amiibo are only going to be purchased by the most die-hard fans of a game, just the kind of person who would want a challenge mode version of a level. Completing these missions rewards a variety of content, a unique armor set for each, as well as an extra arcade minigame to play in the lobby area, and multiplayer versions of the Hero Charger, Hero Roller, and Hero Shot, respectively. Splatoon 1 is not a game with very much single-player content, so locking so much of it, hours and hours of additional single-player content, behind amiibo sucks. I'm not someone who has a huge problem with amiibo conceptually. Obviously not, I already own a bunch of them, including all of the Splatoon ones I needed for this video. I like having relatively cheap, high-quality figures of characters I like to sit on a shelf somewhere, and getting a little bonus content like an outfit in a game for scanning my amiibo. That's great, that's fun, that's fine, as far as I'm concerned. When you start locking this much meaningful content behind them, though, not just alternate costumes, but entire single-player levels, that's frustrating. The real problem, though, the reason it especially sucks, is because amiibo are notoriously hard to find, still to this day. If you want to buy a set of Splatoon amiibo, there's no guarantee you'll be able to find them at the retail price. While I think that retail price is pretty reasonable, it can take weeks, months, or years of searching to find these things at that price. The reason I'm still missing two of the Splatoon amiibo, Octoling Girl and Octoling Octo, is because they're a really limited run and cost an outrageous price to this day. This is the real problem with amiibo, a problem Nintendo has never shown any interest in fixing, and yeah, I wish so many costumes, and in this case levels, were not locked behind figures, which there's no guarantee you can find on store shelves. At the same time, the question of whether amiibo are all bad, actually, is beyond the scope of this video. Are amiibo, gating content behind amiibo, and especially the shortages of amiibo, a sketchy practice by Nintendo? Probably, but this video is only concerned with the single-player content. As it is, Nintendo learned their lesson after this, and would not gate any further single-player content behind amiibo in the later games. There, they unlock multiplayer costume pieces. That's it. There's really not much point in complaining about Nintendo's questionable practices of a decade ago. Not when they have questionable practices of right now to complain about instead. What's interesting about these amiibo levels is that all of the ideas within them would immediately become a part of the single-player campaigns going forward. The idea of re-challenging levels with other weapons would be a staple of every future campaign. Time trial levels show up again and again after this. Limited ink levels would become common. Levels where you were given an infinite special to use instead of a standard weapon would become common, not only as a special challenge mode, but with entire levels built around those specials specifically, letting the developers create new types of levels which wouldn't work with any other weapon. These amiibo levels are really interesting to look back at, because they're the first time the developers really got a chance to experiment with weird new ideas of what a Splatoon level could be. This sort of weird experimentation is a defining trait of the entire franchise moving forward. Luckily, this would not be the end of the Splatoon franchise. Although Splatoon could easily have failed and, as mentioned earlier, been relegated to the realm of forgotten Nintendo IP like ARMS or Odama, the first Splatoon managed to sell 4.95 million copies. That's highly, highly impressive. And it meant that Splatoon was absolutely certain to receive more installments, sooner rather than later. If it was one of the few system sellers for the Wii U, then Nintendo knew it could sell systems for the Switch, hopefully a lot earlier in that system's lifespan. Next time, we'll talk about the campaign for Splatoon 2, Octo Canyon.